Dr. JC back in the house. Yes, one more time for lesson 4. This week 12 lecture we're going to take in 3 small parts. We're going to talk about 3 different so-styled Muslim gunpowder empires. The Ottomans, modern-day Turkey, the Safavids, modern-day Iran, and the Mughals, modern-day India. I'm going to apologize up front that akin to Africa, this summer I'm going to be reworking this lecture some. Therefore, I'm going to keep it very brief. I'll do 3 short pieces, one on the Ottomans, one on the Safavids, and one on the Mughals. So let's jump right into the Ottomans next. When we're talking about the Ottoman Empire, I want you guys to think of the former Byzantine Empire largely, okay? As mentioned during the lecture on the Crusades, as the Crusades brought about changes in the Muslim world, fights over leadership, the end of the Abbasid dynasty, well, one of the individual groups or ethnic groups that the Abbasids used, in some sense as mercenaries, were these Seljuk Turks. And over time, what's going to happen is the Turks are going to gain power. They become a regional power, and pretty soon they're going to become an international power. When I use the words pretty soon, please understand I'm using that phrase in an ancient historical context, which means the speed and pace of change is much slower. You know, hell, anymore you blink and you're like 4 iPhones behind, right? No, it's different. So if we look on the map here, there's a key battle that's going to take place in 1071 at Manzikert. And this is where the Turks are really going to push back the Byzantines for the first time, establish themselves as a regional power, and over the course of the next roughly 400 years, it won't be till 1453 that the Byzantine Empire eventually collapses, but over the course of the next 3 centuries, almost 4 centuries, the Turks are going to solidify themselves as the dominant regional power, and we'll see that take place. As mentioned previously, the big change is going to come in 1453. This is when the Turks, and I'll refer to them as the Ottoman Turks now, this is when the Ottomans will lay siege to Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire will not be able to hold them back. They will eventually capitulate, and it's going to set about Ottoman rule now from 1453, get this, to 1918. Yes, the Ottoman Empire will be around all the way to the end of World War I. So where were some of the reasons then that the Ottomans were able to maintain power for almost 400 years in the more modern age, which really says something. I mean, it does give us an indication of the power, strength, wealth, and reach of the empire. Some of the reasons for their success and longevity are listed here on the slide. Yes, geography matters to be sure. They're able to use their location in the center of the known world, although that known world is fixing to change a little bit. 1450s, we're going to start to see Europeans sail west. It's going to open up this whole new world. We'll talk about that later. So geography mattered. They were able to be the sort of middleman as it relates to trade. But they also adopted new military innovations and tactics. In some ways, they learned this lesson from the Mongols. Certainly the Battle of Ain Jalut taught the Muslim world a little something about technological change and innovation. And after turning back the Mongolian charge there at Ain Jalut, the Muslim world, especially the Ottomans, began to start to deal with new iterations of this hand cannon. They are going to have created this thing known as an arquebus. It's a shoulder-fired musket. So rather than hold it by the hand, now it's going to be fired from one shoulder. Still a smoothbore, not rifling yet, but much more effective. The kinetic potential is much better here. The killing power is much better here. They will also harness this same gunpowder for the use of cannon and mortars. So that as it relates to land warfare, the Muslim world is really going to be ahead of everyone else in the world, to include Europe, for a while. Among the final few select reasons here as it relates to the length of Ottoman rule has to do with the structure of their government, a very strong centralized government, sometimes ruling by fear, sometimes ruling through toleration, and I think that ebb and flow helped make it last as well. It wasn't all one or all the other, but they were able to pattern their form of governance after systems that came before them that had worked very well for a long period of time too, such as the Byzantines and the Persians, both in that region. Both the Byzantines and Persians would make use of regional or provincial governors. In the Ottoman world, they called them beys. And like the Persians, the Ottomans will create an elite professionally trained guard, shock troops in a way, known as janissaries. Those that are interested in janissaries or this sort of imperial guard of sorts, I would ask that you guys Google that. It's kind of interesting because actually many of these individuals are from Eastern Europe. So they are Muslims that are capturing Christians and then in time training them, converting them, so on and so forth, to be professional shock troops in the Muslim world. It's kind of an interesting story. In addition to the Janissaries, an elite cavalry known as the Sipahis was established as well. This should make sense to us, right? In the Mongolian world, if you if you had a severe wake-up call and saw the end of the Islamic age brought by the Mongols, individuals on horseback, you might want to mimic that. The Ottomans will do that. So these individuals will be used to not only collect taxes, but be able to move throughout the empire with as much speed as the Mongols were able to. So very effective force. However, they don't have what? Weaponry yet. They haven't figured out how to do firearms on horseback. We're not there yet, okay? But the psychological effect of being charged by a horse is still there. So in that regard, the Sipahis were an effective and efficient fighting force. Doing a bit of a hard pivot here back to centralization of power, the Sultan, just as he would appoint regional governors, those beys, he would also have local advisors for domestic concerns, those more near to Constantinople. And these individuals would be known as viziers, to include a chief of staff of sorts or a grand vizier. So as mentioned on the slide here, in akin to in the American governmental structure, the President of the United States has this cabinet, and anytime he calls a cabinet meeting, there'll be a chief of staff there, as well as the head of all the various departments and agencies in the government. The same sort of thing was put into place by the Ottomans as well. Therefore, those regional governors or beys would be reporting to these viziers, the viziers then reporting to the grand vizier and or the sultan. Decisions were made by the sultan, handed back to the grand vizier, down to the viziers, back to the regional governors, so you could see the flow of power here. Very efficient, especially as it relates to hammering home the vision, messaging, and direction of the Ottoman Empire as envisioned by the Sultan. Before we start to wind down this lecture discussion in the Ottoman world, I'd be completely remiss if I didn't mention arguably the greatest of the Ottoman sultans, Suleiman the Magnificent. Just as we saw that golden age of Islam, really more the golden age of the Abbasid dynasty, come about because of Harun al-Rashid previously, the same thing's going to occur in the Ottoman world. An Ottoman golden age is going to be witnessed and experienced by individuals because of Suleiman the Magnificent, known to locals, those within the empire, as Kunani the lawgiver. Interesting in this regard that a man that is very successful militarily, both at land and at sea, as we'll talk about briefly, is remembered as a lawgiver. That's important. Whether Suleiman as a young man came to sort of idolize and study Alexander the Great, that's a subject to some discussion and debate at present. But his actions as a leader does suggest that maybe he did do a little reading on how to do empire from Alexander. The idea that you can be this sort of warrior philosopher, that winning hearts and minds is important if you want your empire to last for a long period of time. And this idea of a warrior philosopher is clearly present under Suleiman's leadership. Not only will he go about reforming society, again, if he's known as the lawgiver, people are looking at him for social policy, social changes, but he's also advancing military technologies, both at land and at sea. This is a guy that leads, he's out front with his armies, and has been known to go to sea as well. So this guy's a general and an admiral, kind of crazy in a way. And his fighting isn't just against Christians in Eastern Europe. He will fight against the Safavid Empire in Persia as well. In fact, during this golden age of the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman, the Ottoman Navy is going to expand its reach. not just in the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf, but all the way up into European waters as well. Historical accounts from Western Europe and from Northern Europe do make note of Ottoman ships operating in what would be the North Sea. These are areas that we would typically think of the Vikings being once in control of. And just as the Vikings had a major impact on England and the creation of an English navy under King Alfred and others, the Ottomans are going to have an impact as well on Western European naval engineering. Recognizing the importance of the cannon to military success of the Ottoman Empire, and in viewing the threat that these Ottoman ships bring with them by operating in your own local waters, Western European nations like England and France began to say, you know what, maybe we need to change our design of our ships a little bit. After all, if this globe is more water than land, we're starting to find out, maybe what we need to do is learn to control the seas. And if the cannon can work on land, then maybe we could put it to work at sea as well. And what you'll start to see then is the creation of a British Navy, and a French Navy, of course, too, to include the Spanish and others. So largely Western European navies are going to begin to harness the cannon along the sides of their ships, what we would call ships of the line today. And this is going to give them decisive firepower at sea. And once you can control the sea, you can control trade. And he who controls trade, yep, you make the rules. So the Ottomans are going to force Western Europeans to re-engineer their navies, and it's going to have a major impact on the British, most specifically the British Empire, in the 17 and 1800s. The Ottomans, therefore, are going to have far-reaching impact. And as we begin to transition out of the Ottomans here and into the Safavids next, I wanted to summarize a few bullet points as it relates to the Ottomans. The Ottomans will bring about the end of the Byzantine Empire and the creation of this new Ottoman one, centered in Constantinople, as a symbol, a lasting symbol, quite frankly, of that change, is the Hagia Sophia. If you remember the Hagia Sophia, that engineering project that was commissioned by Justinian. And if you remember that slide, you had the pictures on it where we added the pillars. The pillars were added when the Ottomans came, symbolic of Islam. Remember, too, that the Ottoman Empire is a very strong, centralized government, led by a sultan, protected by elite military forces like those Janissaries and Sipahis. And lastly, that Suleiman the Magnificent will be the individual at the helm of the Ottoman Empire during its golden age. This is an individual that's going to look to do empire through toleration rather than fear, and that will have a long-lasting impact on the Ottomans. And rather than talk about the specific decline of the Ottomans, that's really a story for the second half of this course, or World II. I do want you to remember, lastly, that they will be around until 1918, all the way up to the end of World War I. So a very long-lasting empire, especially because it's much more modern than it is ancient. We'll move a little bit east next into Persian lands, modern Iran, and talk about the Safavids, the second of these three Muslim gunpowder empires. Dr. JC out from the Ottomans, onto the Safavids.